When we talk about ancient Rome, our minds fill with images of gladiators, emperors, and epic battles. But behind that grandeur, there were surprising and sometimes unsettling aspects of daily life. Habits that today would seem totally strange to us and, in some cases, even scandalous. What was completely normal for the Romans could be unimaginable for us. Today, we will dive into some of the strangest intimate habits of ancient Rome, the ones that marked the private life of this fascinating civilization. Do you dare to learn about them? If you're curious, don't forget to leave a like, and without further ado, let's get into the video. Let's start with a unique literary work from ancient Rome, The Golden Ass, written by Apuleius. This novel is the only one to have survived in its entirety from Latin-written Roman literature. In this story, a young man named Lucius, during his stay in Thessaly, gets involved in a series of problems that lead to him being transformed into a donkey by a sorceress. Throughout his adventure, Lucius witnesses sexual scenes and situations that today would seem completely strange to us. What is surprising about the work is that, although sexual situations are abundant, they are presented in such a natural way that Lucius, the protagonist, does not show exaggerated surprise. The novel narrates homosexual fantasies, sexual relationships between men and women, and several acts of sexual aggression, but all of this was completely normal within the Roman social context. In one of the most curious passages, Lucius, transformed into a donkey, is taken to the chambers of a beautiful woman who, without hesitation, declares her desire to ride the donkey. Although Lucius finds the situation puzzling, he is also attracted to the idea, but cannot help but wonder how a donkey could have a relationship with a woman. This scene reflects the astonishing normalcy with which many sexual topics were treated in Rome. If there is one author in ancient Rome known for exploring sexuality without any kind of censorship, it is Martial. This writer and poet from the Roman imperial era was famous for his epigrams, short poems that dealt with a variety of topics, from the comedic to the provocative. However, what stands out most in his work are his explicitly sexual writings. Martial did not just describe romantic relationships. In his verses, he addressed topics such as fixation on excrement, sexual relations between men and boys, and even love for the backside. These ideas, of course, were met with criticism, but paradoxically, his works were incredibly popular among the Romans. The combination of rawness and humor in his poetry made him highly appreciated in his time. In a world like Rome, where sexual taboos seemed to be diluted under a layer of cultural acceptance, Martial took advantage of the opportunity to explore the limits of what was allowed. Although some of his poems were enormously popular, his style also faced harsh criticism due to its explicit and, at times, morbid nature. The interesting thing is that, despite the controversy surrounding his work, Martial remained a beloved figure in Roman society. And, while many of his poems today would seem scandalous to us, to the Romans they represented a form of crude comedy and an open exploration of sexuality. In ancient Rome, prostitution was a common and accepted practice, with different types of services ranging from street sex workers to slaves dedicated to satisfying the elite men. But it wasn't only women involved in prostitution. Homosexuality, especially male homosexuality, was also widely addressed in Roman society. The writer Juvenal, famous for his satirical style, tackled prostitution and sexual slavery in his works. In his satires, he described how wealthy Romans would resort to slaves, including young boys, to satisfy their sexual desires. Although some of these practices were looked down upon, Romans accepted relationships between men, especially when the young person played the role of a passive partner. Juvenal also wrote about male homosexuality, condemning those men who were effeminate or did not meet the expectations of Roman society. However, paradoxically, young slaves and men who were the receptive partners in these sexual relationships were not considered weak or contemptible. On many occasions, these men simply formed part of the social structure without losing their value, which highlights the complexity of the Romans' attitudes toward homosexuality. Unlike current norms, in Rome, dominance in sexual relationships was closely tied to social status and each individual's role within the hierarchy. Homosexuality was not rejected as morally unacceptable but was judged based on whether individuals took on active or passive roles. If you thought that sexuality in ancient Rome was only a topic addressed in the poems of Martial or Juvenal, you'll be surprised to learn that there were manuals dedicated exclusively to teaching Romans about the art of sexuality. And no, we're not talking about just any kind of manual, but illustrated and detailed texts that guided inexperienced lovers on new positions and techniques. One of the most eccentric names in this field is Elephantis, a Greek writer who, during the Roman period, published several manuals on sex. Although no complete copies of his works have survived, it is known that these little manuals were very popular among the Romans, who found them useful for improving their sexual skills. Elephantis manuals included graphic illustrations and advice on how to improve relationships, becoming something like the self-help books of the time. Despite the explicit nature of these texts, Roman high society, including figures like Emperor Tiberius, was fascinated by them. It is said that Tiberius owned a complete collection of Elephantis manuals, reflecting how common and accepted these works were in Roman daily life. These manuals, though peculiar, show us a key aspect of Roman sexuality, their openness and curiosity about various forms of pleasure. For the Romans, sexuality was a field of constant exploration, without the kind of repression that, in many cases, characterizes modern societies. As we've seen, sexuality in ancient Rome was as diverse as Roman society itself. From the freedom to explore pleasure through poetry and literature, to detailed sexual manuals offering practical advice, the Romans did not have the same taboos modern societies have about sexuality. Despite their sophistication in other aspects of life, Rome was also marked by an open and sometimes excessive attitude toward sex. Relationships between men and women, tensions surrounding prostitution and homosexuality, and the normalization of many behaviors that would seem unusual to us today, were an integral part of their daily life. In the end, what we can learn from ancient Rome is that sexuality, just like customs and cultures, can be a reflection of the openness and values of a civilization. While some of these habits may seem scandalous today, for the Romans, they simply formed part of their nature and way of living. What do you think? Do you believe that ancient Rome was more open or permissive than our current society when it comes to sexuality? Leave your opinion in the comments, and if this topic surprised you, don't forget to subscribe and share the video to continue discovering more about the fascinating history of Rome.